Welcome today to this BPCA webinar on live capture trapping. Hope you're all well, keeping well and keeping busy, hopefully, as well. Now that we're seeing a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, aren't we, in terms of lockdown, getting out there, feeling a little bit normal again. I'm not sure if I ever felt normal, but certainly work-wise, it's great to see you're all busy, and really great to see that we have 134 participants with us so far, ticking up all the time. So as always, I like to express my appreciation, and it's good to see the passion that we have out there, and you want to keep up to date with things that are going on, get some CPD in, and some good reminders on some practical implementation of various different aspects of pest control. So good to see you all. Just before we get started, a lot of you are familiar with webinars now. We've been doing them over 2 years, but just as a little bit of an introduction and a bit of a reminder on how this is going to work. So firstly, CPD. Of course, some of you will be here for CPD, and if that's not the only reason, then fantastic. You're going to get 1 point today. It's 1 point for each technical hour of training that you do. So if you already registered with us, you've already provided, hopefully, your CPD number, and we'll be getting that registered for you after today. So make sure you stay with me, and we will sort that out for you afterwards. If you are watching this webinar later on down the line, pre-recorded, then you are going to need to register those points or that point yourself. Just speak to the retrospective CPD scheme that you have, okay? Q&A. So we're going to do some questions and answers. I'm going to do them at the end of the webinar. I think it works best that way. And also you can accumulate your questions and get them into me. You'll see a Q&A button, bottom of your screen, side of your screen. Maybe you might need to touch it if you're on a phone, and you'll see it pop up. So really important, use the Q&A section for questions to me. So if you have any questions about what I'm talking about, or some questions about maybe something I haven't covered and you're just interested, then pop it in that Q&A section. At the end, I will do my best to get to all of them. If you have any technical issues, we have a chat section. So video, sound, anything like that. I've got a colleague sitting on the background with me, Kat, who's going to keep an eye on that chat section. So again, if you have any technical issues, just put a comment in there. And if we can, we'll try and help you and guide you in terms of trying to get that sorted out. Hopefully it won't be my end. But as I said, I've got Kat there supporting me. And also you can use that chat function to do as it says on the label. You can have a chat or put any comments in there about what I'm talking about. I might be asking you to put things in there sometimes to, give each other ideas. So yeah, use that chat section for, as it says on the box, and Q&A bit for questions to me, because I won't necessarily see that chat section. Okay. I can't see or hear you, of course. So, we need to rely on those things for you to be able to communicate with me. If I don't get to all the questions at the end, then I will not do my best. I will do. I'll get them out in an email to you after the webinar, to everybody, and just give them a general response. And then if you need anything more, you can get in touch with us, can't you? I think that's about it, really. What I'm going to do is I am going to start sharing my presentation. I haven't heard there's any technical issues. I think Kat would pop her sound on and tell me if there is, but if I don't hear anything, then I'm going to assume the best. No news is good news, as they say. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. And again, I will rely on my trusted colleague to pop up and tell me if there are any issues. Okay, so live capture trapping. Really important for you to know what I'm going to be covering in this webinar. You want to know what you're here for, what you expect to hear from me, and what it's not about. So this webinar is not about individual vertebrate pests that you may be using live trapping for, okay? Or, how we implement that specific trapping program for a specific pest. There's just too many, there's too many possibilities, too many examples that I may need to go through. We've only got an hour today, haven't we? So I can't go into specifics and pest specifics. The topic would just be too vast. And, we've got everything from mink and rats and foxes and feral cats and pigeons. The list is not endless, but it's a large list. So I can't go into them specifically, but I will refer to some specific pests where I feel there's an important circumstance for you to be aware of. And that's just, my due diligence to make sure that, if you're going into a certain area of live trapping, you've got some, mainly legal knowledge on what you need to consider, okay? So what we're going to be looking at today then, let me show the agenda. So LCTs, I've just abbreviated it, live capture trapping, that's what that is. So why we use it, sort of animals that we may use it for as well. Legislation, of course, really important. Our code of practice, we've got a code of practice. There's a few out there from different industries, but I will go over what we have and then give you some direction to any more that might be useful to you. And then, like I always do in these things, general practical implementation, safety, professionalism, things like that, things you need to consider as an overall consideration for any live capture trapping you're doing. And then we do some questions. You can get them in there. Anything I haven't covered that you think, oh, I was expecting Natalie to do that. So I'll ask the question in the Q&A section, no problem at all. And then anything else if you want me to elaborate. Okay, good. I think we're all good to go. I think sound and visual is going well. So this is not an exclusive list or an absolute comprehensive list of all the animals that we may use live capture for, or the pests we may use live capture for. Now, I've used that word animals because they're not always pests, are they, what we use live capture for? For example, I've got a picture there of a robin. Of course, we're not going to be controlling robins or do anything like that, but sometimes you may get the instance of a protected species or a robin that is particularly protected in a food factory or in an area where it's absolutely essential you remove it. Now, there's licensing and all sorts associated with trapping birds like robins in food factories. I'll go into that slightly a bit later on, but they can be questions you can ask in a little bit more detail if needed. So yeah, it's not just pest species we might be live capturing for. But there's a variety of them there, as you can see, grey squirrel and rats, pigeons, foxes, etc. We've got mink up there in the right-hand corner. Not an area I've worked in a lot. It's usually wildlife management. It's usually quite a specific area that companies specialise in or individuals specialise in, and you generally work within that. Maybe rabbit control as well. Of course, that's something else that we can come across. So yeah, just a few ideas there. Now, before I carry on, in terms of who this webinar is going to be good for, certainly a lot of this information here will be brand new and really, really useful to anybody who's new to the industry. If you're new to pest control, pest management, maybe live capture trapping is new to you, I think a lot of this information in here will be brand new and hopefully of real value to you. It will be valuable, I think, to everybody, even those that have been in the industry a bit longer. It's a good reminder to what you should be doing, you shouldn't be doing. And again, gives you that invigoration to, look into things a bit more if there's anything I say here that you want to know more detail about that I haven't necessarily given just because of time constraints. Okay. And then also, anybody who's not within the industry, you might just be watching this because you've got a contractor that's, carrying out live capture trapping or is interested in it. You just want to know a bit more about it. So I think it's going to be useful to everybody. Okay. So when we might use live capture trapping, sometimes, certainly when there's a risk of non-target species. For example, here, the image you can see is a water vole. Now, that's quite a common one. We may get a report of, rats in a certain area around, riverbanks or lakes, and you've got to do your due diligence, haven't you, to make sure that you're not capturing anything that you shouldn't, or not controlling, or putting rodenticides down, or putting spring traps down for anything that you're not meant to be controlling. So certainly, if there's a risk of non-target species, or even to identify the species of pest when you're not quite sure, you don't always see these pests out and about during the day. You might see their droppings and signs and evidence. And of course, if water voles, quite a common sign that it's water voles is that they usually chop down or shorten down the long grasses that are at the side of the bank. You can usually see that feeding activity that they have, and their droppings as well. If you can get to the area, usually outside their burrows, things like that, is quite distinctive. But you can't always get that access. You don't always see the live animal themselves to be able to identify it. So certainly when you're concerned about that, or you want to do an identification, we can use live trapping for that. And also to catch and release out of a specific area, like I mentioned in the previous slide, if you have a protected species of bird that's not on a general license and you need to be protecting it and not harming it in any way, then you can apply for class licenses to remove those birds, and it'll be live capture. There'll be certain guidance that will be given to you by the relevant authority in your country, Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. And yeah, you'll be catching to release that single bird. Okay. Also multi-catching, so things like, feral pigeons, for example, when you want to capture a large amount of the pest species, and as I said, that's generally only going to be with feral pigeons. Something that not everybody's got involved with. I've done it a few times myself, and it's certainly an experience and very intensive. Can be very effective sometimes, but usually it's quite a continued process, quite a routine process that has to happen, because fortunately we don't catch a few and that's it, never have a problem again. We usually get the feral pigeons returning. So multi-catching. And then it might also be because you prefer it. Sometimes customers ask you to use them as they see them as more humane. But, we really have to consider our legal and professional standpoint on that. Most captured pests will need to be dispatched. I'll go into that a little bit more. We're going to be talking about legislation in just a moment. But when customers request you to use a live capture trap because they feel it's more humane, specifically, you get it with mice a lot, and possibly even rats, squirrels, most definitely. And they have this impression that you're going to be able to release it somewhere else. But as we know, that is an issue, and I'll go into that a bit more as we go along. So all these reasons, if any of you are sat there thinking, Natalie, there's loads more reasons why I use live capture traps, put it in the chat section. Share your information there. Stick it in the Q&A bit as well, so that I can see at the end on different reasons you might have used it. But these are the ones I've certainly come across myself, and the things that you guys talk to me about on why you use them. Okay, not for everybody, but certainly when we do need them, they're a great tool. So legislation, when we're dealing with animals, dealing with pests, dealing with life, we have an obligation to, of course, keep them, free from suffering, free from pain, consider their welfare. It's a moral obligation, not just a legal, but in terms of the legislation. So we have the Animal Welfare Act. Now, we've got slightly different wording for different areas of the country. So England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, as you can see here. But generally, all the principles are the same across these pieces of legislation. And the main part of this act is that the owners and keepers have a duty of care to their animals, and you must make sure that their needs are met. For example, you need to have a suitable environment and a place for them to live. Now, the Animal Welfare Act is also related to pets, not just the pests we capture, but it's generally animal welfare. And if you own an animal, then it's that welfare. And they have a suitable environment, and also you consider their welfare and that they're not suffering in any way. So this legislation, it does actually talk about the ownership of an animal. So animal welfare relates to if you are you have an animal in your possession and you're an owner of it. Now, if we have a live capture trap, for example, and you catch a squirrel, that squirrel is now in your care. You are the owner of that squirrel. So you have a duty under this Animal Welfare Act to ensure that, the trap is of good condition, that when you put these traps down, they're not positioned in such a way that something could get caught in the trap door. You need to make sure your traps are maintained so that you're going to get a reliable catch and you're not going to cause any issues there. And also another thing to consider is that if you have a live capture trap and you're using it outside, for example, which can happen, you're covering it up and you're making sure it's, positioned in a way that you're going to get a good catch. That's all practical implementation stuff, and getting that right and attracting the animal to it. But also it needs to be positioned in a way and checked in such a way that predators are not an issue. You think if you've got a pest animal caught in a cage and there's a potential for foxes in the area, of course, you could cause harm and suffering from that predator getting access to that trap and causing some significant psychological, if not physical, damage to that captured pest that you've got. So, and you're responsible for that. I just wanted to throw it out there to my colleague Kat, don't have to come up, but my screen's flashing a bit. Hopefully the image is okay for everybody. But yeah, just let me know if there is an issue.
It does seem to be okay on my end, but if anybody has any problems, let me know in chat.
Great. Thanks, Kat. It's probably just my my screen, but hopefully you're all okay. Great. So where was I? Yeah. So in terms of you carrying out live capture trapping, as soon as you start doing that and you put that door up and you're thinking about catching this animal, you are responsible for its welfare. There's all sorts of fines that can come about with animal welfare if someone was to report anything. As we know, social media and the ability to be able to take photographs of live capture traps that have got an animal in it are so easy, and members of the public or even your customers, if they felt in any way that something you were doing was not quite right, they're going to get it out there quite quickly, aren't they? So yeah, you just need to think about all these things. So animal welfare, everything you do, the thing that must be in your mind the most is the welfare of that animal. Okay. Second to that is your success in controlling the problem, and I'm quite honest about that. Animal welfare is the most important thing. Okay, so we have actually PPC, the latest one that should have hopefully dropped on most of your doorsteps. We've got a quite an in-depth article on animal welfare. It's a big feature to the magazine, so go and have a look at that, and you can read a bit more into the Animal Welfare Act. Good. Okay, so that's the first one, the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So this is more to do with invasive species and the introduction of, as well as protection of in certain species. So we've got invasive ones like the grey squirrel, edible dormouse as well. These cannot be introduced to an environment. We cannot introduce these animals into the UK. Now, of course, we know they're here. Why does that matter to us? So if you capture a grey squirrel or an edible dormouse or a Canada goose, yeah, let's go with that. These are all invasive species. So if you catch one alive in your trap, you cannot legally release it, because that would be breaking the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, because we are not allowed to introduce them. They've been previously introduced. Some laws have come in to say don't do it anymore. So when we do capture them, we have to make sure we dispatch them. The Animal Welfare Act as well. So birds across the board are protected. All birds in the UK are protected. Every single one, everything from feral pigeon to a robin. Now, within the Wildlife and Countryside Act, we do have certain general licenses. This is not a general license talk. I'm not going to go into it, but general licenses and class licenses and individual licenses, different things for birds, specifically to birds, that allow us to control or carry out certain activities that would otherwise be illegal with regards to birds. So if you get feral pigeons, for example, are on a lot of general licenses. A lot of gull species have been taken off of general licenses, and now you need to apply for individual licenses. And it really depends what you're doing it for. So you might be doing it in the agricultural area, or you might be in a food factory trying to get rid of something, or you might be under a bridge where there's lots of defecation by feral pigeons and you need to do something about them. There are different licenses, but the Wildlife and Countryside Act protects birds across the board without exception. Every single bird in the UK is protected, just with some little specific general licenses there if we need it. Okay. But also, so in I think it's section 1 to 8, you've got things like badgers and bats are protected, snakes, red squirrels, and things like that. So that's the importance of Wildlife and Countryside Act. There is a protection there, and if you're live capture trapping, or any trapping, but we're talking about live capture here, you need to consider that Wildlife and Countryside Act and think about the target pests you've got. Think about any pests or any animals in the area like badgers and bats and snakes or red squirrels that could succumb to anything that you're doing, and consider it. Okay. The other bit of legislation, so we have the Wild Mammals Protection Act 1996, and also humane, that mainly talks about humane dispatch. So actually, historically, this act kind of plugs a loophole that existed previously in wildlife legislation. We didn't really have any legislation that protected non-captive, i.e. wild animals. It was all to do with, livestock and pets and things like that, that's more specifically in our care. But nothing really for non-captive and wild. So it mainly covers the ways that you cannot dispatch a mammal. And there's various different things, but just to give you a bit of a nice description here, this bit of legislation makes it an offence to do all these things. You might think, well, why would I want to mutilate or kick or stab an animal? Well, yeah, well, absolutely. Why would you? And as a pest controller, that's not something that's going to be humane or kind or necessary. And it's really sad that this legislation has to come in to tell humans not to do these things to animals. But yeah, certainly did. And it plugged that loophole. But it is important to us because, of course, we need to dispatch animals. And, these are a few of the ways that we must not do it. And of course, the caveat there is with intent to inflict unnecessary suffering. Okay, so if anyone was ever to be unfortunate enough to end up in court over the dispatch of an animal and someone wanting to dispute that it was humane and it wasn't, one of these things, then they've got to also prove that you've done it with the intent to inflict unnecessary suffering. Okay, so a really important one there. So they're the main bits of legislation. I'm just going to quickly shoot back to the Animal Welfare Act. I'll probably mention this a bit later, but the other element of the Animal Welfare Act. So let's say you've got a live capture trap and you have a fox, for example, in there. It's quite a common question. Brilliant success. You've captured a fox. You're thinking about dispatch. Can't I just go and release it somewhere? Is there anywhere that says I can't release them? Is it the same as grey squirrels? Not necessarily. So, it's a bit vague with foxes, and in terms of releasing them into the environment once you've caught them. They aren't mentioned in the Wildlife and Countryside Act as saying you shouldn't do that. However, there used to be a bit of legislation called the Abandonment of Animals Act, 1960, I think it was. Basically, as it says on the box, the Abandonment of Animals Act, the act of you capturing, for example, a fox, taking it out of its territorial area where it's built up its territory, it's built up possibly, whether it might have vixens that it's, created relationships with, or it might have some cubs in the area, but certainly that territory, you're taking that fox out of that territory and then dumping it, because that's what it is, somewhere else, 5 miles away, 10 miles away, 100 miles away. Firstly, where are you going to put it? Whose land are you going to feel comfortable enough putting that fox on? Or what local authority land are you dumping that fox on? And if someone sees you, I don't know if that's going to go down too well. But also, you're abandoning that fox. It's now in the middle of an unknown territory. It has no idea where its food source is. It has no idea what competition's in the area. And it's likely that fox is going to succumb, is going to die anyway because of that, knowledge of not knowing where the food is, where the reliable food source is, and also possibly some, fighting with other male or other dogs in the area. That can happen. So, and even if it doesn't actually physically succumb, certainly psychologically, it's inhumane. That's kind of the stance we have on it, and the industry has. So, dispatch a lot of the time is a lot more humane. So I flick back to this Animal Welfare Act because the Animal Welfare Act has actually taken over that responsibility of the Abandonment of Animals Act 1960. It's kind of been repealed and replaced by the Animal Welfare Act 2006. So you need to remember that if we are wanting to relocate a captured animal, you've got to think about the abandonment side. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I didn't mix you all up at all there, but just wanted to pop back. So legislation, yeah. If there's any other bits you guys want to talk about or you want to bring up, put it in the Q&A section and I'll certainly talk about it. But I just wanted to go over the main areas of legislation related to live capture trapping. The next bit are codes of practice. So, you can go on, different websites. You've got shooting associations that have codes of practice on, live capture trapping. We have CIH and NPAP as well that have got codes and guidance and live trapping, and we've also got our own. So BPCA Code of Best Practice, all of our members sign up to follow our codes of best practice, and they're short, they're 1 or 2 pages. They're not designed to give you guidance. Our codes of practice are not guidance. They are, don't do this, make sure you do that. Pretty straightforward. And then you can go and search for more in-depth guidance if you need to. But the codes of practice are not just there for us to wave sticks and say, this is what you all must be doing. It's there to certainly help you and go, right, I know what I need to do and what I need to not do. So having a look at our code of practice, these are just a few of the things to remember, a bit of legislation, a bit of practical implementation and things like that. But, cages should be in a good condition and large enough to basically accommodate the target species. You're not going to use a squirrel trap to catch a fox, are you? So common sense stuff. Make sure that, that cage is large enough and in good condition, like I mentioned before. Make sure you maintain them, make sure you look at them regularly, make sure the hinges are all working properly, set it and unset it and set it off to make sure the hinges are working smoothly and quickly, and it's not going to be hanging off somewhere where, I gave that example at the beginning about predators looking for animals that are in live capture traps. You imagine that door flaps down, catches, let's just say, a squirrel, and you're outside, and that maybe that door's a little off, and there's a gap there, but the squirrel can't get out. But maybe a fox coming along is strong enough and could actually get some purchase on that and pull it open. And of course, it's then got a nice meal. Now, you might say that's the nature of laws, but it's not. You've put that trap there. You've captured that animal. It's now has no chance of escape, and that predator has easy access to it. So we need to think about those things. Okay, so in good condition and large enough to be able to accommodate the species. Traps must not be set in a position where the captured animal will be exposed to extreme temperatures. So it's not just predation. It's not just predators, but also certainly extreme temperatures. If extremely cold or extremely warm, you want to get it in shaded areas, or cover it up with foliage that's around. We all have our ways, don't we, on how we protect the trap and protect the hopefully captured pest that you'll have in there. Got to think about that. So predators and temperatures and weather conditions is really important. The appropriate food and water also must be provided to prevent unnecessary suffering. We do have questions sometimes with regards of, well, I'm using these traps and I'm actually visiting them every couple of hours. So the period of time that animal's in there, they don't see it as necessary as having food and water, but it's very unlikely that's going to happen. Our codes of practice say that you need to check them really every 12 hours to 24 hours. The legislation is generally 24 hours in terms of that suffering. It's expected anyway. So, leaving appropriate food or water there is certainly something that needs to occur. And also, it may be advantageous to leave the cage trap unset for a period of time, to allow target animal to feel safe around the cage and hence increase the chances of success. I had some great images sent in by one of our members with regards to having something preset for a period of time. The resolution wasn't quite good enough, so I couldn't get it on here. But yeah, you all seem to be doing that. You all seem to be taking advantage of having an unset or having those trap doors tied open so that the pests can go in freely. I say pests, it may not be a pest. Maybe something that you're intending to capture and release, like a robin, for example, but you want it feeling comfortable, going in and out without any problems, so that when you decide to, right, I'm gonna take that latch off now, so that the next time it goes in there, you've caught it. So all good things to do. Again, like I said, talking about specific situations and how we should be doing it for different animals and different pests. I just haven't got the time today, but it is certainly something to consider and look into a little bit more. Also, so cage, they should be inspected at least once every day, once set. Now, our guidance really is every 12 hours. If you set something at, 7 o'clock at night, 7 o'clock in the morning, you should be checking it. Or if you set it, maybe even a bit later on in the evening. Depends on the pest, doesn't it? Whether it's nocturnal or whether it's diurnal. So whether it's, a day pest, it really depends on when you set it. But the legislation or the code of practice wording that we have there is at least once every day. So between 12 and 24 hours is what we say. The target species also must be humanely dispatched. Now, I'm probably going to have a few questions about how do you humanely dispatch? This is when it comes down to, the specific pest, doesn't it? How you're going to dispatch a squirrel will be different to how you're going to dispatch a fox. It's humane. It's got to be swift. It's got to be quick as possible. And again, what tools that you have, what ways that you have of doing that is up to you, as long as you don't do it in any of the ways mentioned in the Wild Mammals Act, the stab and the mutilate and the beat. We don't want to be doing that. The drowning, we get a lot of, I say issues, it's not really too much to do with us, but we do have reports of members of the public, for example, buying their own live capture traps and catching animals and putting them in butts of water and drowning them, things like that. And as we saw in the legislation there, that's illegal. You can't do that. So whichever way you dispatch it, it just needs to be swift and humane and as quick as possible. Okay, there's no one answer. Now, of course, when you start increasing the size of the animals, larger birds or larger mammals, then possibly the use of firearms will come into play. And then, that's other stuff you need to consider. The person using it obviously has to have a license and be trained. And, you need to be in an area that is not going to be overlooked by people. I mean, generally, when you've got a live animal in your capture and you're thinking, right, okay, I need to dispatch this now, you don't really want to have anybody around other than you, or a colleague if they're with you. You don't want your customer stood there watching you dispatch an animal. It's not pleasant for anybody, let alone somebody who's not in the industry. So, make sure you're discreet about it. Make sure discretion is certainly exercised. And, because even if you do dispatch something perfectly and effectively and amazingly, members of the public don't always see it that way. As we know, it's an emotive industry sometimes, and certainly the dispatch of live animals can be one of those things that are quite emotive. And also, of course, this goes without saying, non-target species must be released unharmed as soon as possible. So if you're doing some fox trapping, live capture fox trapping, and, you check it within your 12, 24 hours and, there's a cat in there, didn't expect that. You release it as soon as possible and off it goes. And that's another reason that they need to be regularly checked. It's not just so that target pest is not left in the trap too long. It's also so that you can get to it quickly if you've caught something you're not supposed to. And that's the benefit of live capture traps, isn't it? You with spring traps, you catch something you're not meant to, well, kind of game over. There's a problem there. Whereas with live capture traps, as long as you get to them regularly enough, you can release that animal unharmed, and there's no issue there. I mean, in terms of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, generally it places no legal requirement on the pest controller to check live capture traps in terms of scale. But like it says here, our code of practice for our members, it's got to be 12 to 24 hours. Okay, must be done. I said before, didn't I? I'm going to mention stuff a little bit more specifically where I think it's important for you. So birds specifically, there's some important things to consider. So I mentioned general licenses, and we have GL 40 and 41 and 42. Generally, it's GL 41, I think it is, which is the public health and public safety license we use for things like feral pigeons. That's great. But if we're doing some live capture trapping, there are additional guidance. Now, it's called GL 33, General License 33, but actually it's not a license. It's a standard license conditions. So if you're doing some live capture trapping, it says in the main general license that you should be referring to and recommends you should be following these standard license conditions. Okay, so GL 33. more specifically when you're using wild birds and using decoys and things, quite a specialist area. So it's just a brief mention, but GL33, it's an interesting read for anybody. So if you in bird control in any way, go and have a look at GL33 if not already. And also for when you birds and you're using live capture trapping, certainly with decoys and things like that. In Scotland, there is an extra condition for cage tagging. I think it was like 1st of April 2020. It was Nature Scot. So Nature Scotland, or Nature Scot for short, are like Natural England, and the licensing took over trap registration from Police Scotland. So Police Scotland used to have that responsibility, and now it's Nature Scot. And basically, you now need to register with Nature Scotland in order to use Larsen traps, Larsen mate traps. I remember them all. Larsen pod, I think it is. So it's mainly where you're using those decoy birds, or you're using traps to sort of multi-catch. Crow traps and things like that. So you need to register with them, even if you're previously registered. So if you previously registered with Police Scotland, you need to re-register with Nature Scot. The Police Scotland trap registration codes will no longer be valid from the 1st of April 2021. Okay, so if you've got that previous Police Scotland registration, you've got till the 1st of April 2021. It's gone, hasn't it? So now you need to be going to Nature Scot. Okay, it's really important. And also those registrations are issued to individual people rather than properties, which used to be before. Trap registration codes will provide you with, you've got to attach them, and any traps listed need to be on the general license for Nature Scot. So go and have a look. There's different standards for different areas of the country sometimes. It's just an important bit there. Okay, so a little bit of practical implementation. Like I said, I know this is very generic. But it applies to any live capture trapping you're doing. So discretion is key. I've trapped squirrels in my time, foxes. I haven't done glisclis before, edible dormouse. I know lots of people who have. It's a very specific area, isn't it? Within the, I think it's the sort of Watfordy kind of area, isn't it? Watford Gap Down. I think they might even be spreading a little bit, I've heard, actually, to be honest. But yeah, I've done some foxes and squirrels and even a few rats here and there, and certainly pigeons. And all of these things apply across the board, regardless of what you're doing. So discretion. I did have an instance where we were, it wasn't actually live capture trapping, but it's still dealing with foxes and drawing them into an area for culls and things like that. And, some of we didn't really tell anybody about it, this fox control going on, because we're trying to be discreet and responsible and not kind of upset anybody unnecessarily, and carried out the work, late at night when nobody was around. It was a hospital in London. And, the 2 days before we were due to sort of implement the program, local newspapers turned up and, we've heard that you're, killing foxes, and all these kind of emotive words and things. And we had to walk away for the job for some months after that, because, it was going to have a detrimental effect on the hospital's reputation. And of course, the pest control company that I worked for at the time. So discretion is not just of course you're going to be discreet, but it can be really vital to the success of the treatment. And of course, competence. So you've got to know your pest. You've got to know what you're targeting, know what other non-target species might be in the area. You've got to know about timescales, know about their feeding habits, the likeliness of them going into that trap quite happily. Do you need to do some pre-baiting, things like this? Got to be competent, get out there and get some training. What I do on these webinars, this is not training per se. This is information sharing. This is, let's think about these things. I want to remind you guys of these things, and, ask some questions, and let's get talking about it, get you thinking about some things. And then afterwards, hopefully it'll inspire you, encourage you to go and, do some more in-depth training, or maybe some toolbox talks in your company, and have a good talk about it. It might inspire you to go, actually, I want to go and have a good old clean up of my traps and make sure they're working properly. If just one of those things happens as a result of this webinar, I'm happy. Okay. But yes, it's not necessarily training. It's more of a engagement with you. So be competent. All right. Make sure you're happy you are and your staff are as well. Be, of course, safe and humane. I can't say that enough. Make sure that is top of your list, and then thinking about dispatch as well. I mean, I wanted just to cover one thing I haven't written here that I've thought about just before the webinar. I was chatting to one of my colleagues, and yeah, we were just reminding each other of transporting animals. Now, I've had a few questions before that do you have to have a transport license for animals, considering that we're capturing them in cages and carting them off somewhere. We've heard of this. So in terms of the EU regulation, they did set out some rules, and that if you transport animals in connection with economic activity, okay, and the way it's sort of being interpreted is any transporting of animals undertaken as part of business or commercial activity which aims at achieving financial gain, whether it's direct or indirect, for any person or company involved with the transport. However, this does not include, so if you're in this list below, it doesn't include you. You don't need to have a wildlife or an animal transport license. I'm not going to read them all out, but one of the points is you don't have to have one for journeys where the animal is an individual animal accompanied by its owner or other responsible person. So like we said before, the legislation, animal welfare, once you've captured that animal in a cage trap, it's now your responsibility to ensure that its forwarding future is as comfortable as possible. So you're the owner of it. You're now responsible for that animal. So, and it's just one. You're not transporting them for any economic purpose. You're not selling them off to somebody or transporting them for a vet over to a place of surgery or whatever it might be. You're capturing that one animal. You're now its owner and responsible for it. And obviously, you're most likely going to be dispatching it unless it's for capture and release. Okay, so we don't need to worry about animal transport licenses. Okay. Went off point a bit there, but I thought that was an important bit just to cover. Ensure things are documented. So we talk about checking these traps regularly and making sure things are done humanely and that you can prove that you've been back to these traps regularly. So as an example, if you set a squirrel trap in, say, an attic, for example, a live capture trap, and you come back, 10 hours later, 15 hours later, somewhere in between that 12 and 24 hours, and you check it and there's nothing in there, great, and you might be going back and forth and doing this a few times, and eventually might capture something and off you go. And if you haven't got any paperwork to say you've been doing those regular checks, then what could happen? What happens if someone accuses you of, leaving an animal in there suffering, or if they hear the trap go off and they think, oh, I'm going to go and have a look at that. Oh, I'm going to take a photo of that squirrel in there. Brilliant. We've got a squirrel. Yay. And you may come back at good intervals, at legal intervals. You take that trap away, you do what you need to do. But our customers now got that image of that animal in a cage. And again, I'm not a cup is half empty sort of person. I'm a cup is half full. But sometimes when it comes to work and pest management and looking after, your reputation, you've got to think cup is half empty sometimes. And I do think sometimes could they do with that image? Could they stick it on social media somewhere? Could they report me and make something up about me? Humans are strange. They can do sometimes. But if you've got that paperwork to say that, no, I have been regularly, here's the paperwork, I've given it to you, you've signed it also. I have covered my legal requirement and I've treated that animal humanely. You've got nothing against me. Okay, so paperwork's really important, that it's documented. Your visits to those traps are documented. Really very important. Of course, codes of practice, important for you to follow, and use effective equipment. Don't use something that's not suitable for the pest species. Makes sense, doesn't it? Again, I've done a bit of I was a bit specific about birds earlier, and I'm going to be a little bit specific about feral cats now. This image was courtesy of Sean here from Killline Pest Control. He sent it in to me. A few cats here, as you can see. Again, they all look pretty relaxed, don't they? Pretty chilled out. They're ready off to be transported and covered up, and feral cats likely taken to veterinary practice to be scanned. So this is the important thing about if you're dealing with feral cats, or it's something a customer has asked you to do, but they're not quite sure if they're feral cats or not feral cats. So you need to be aware of one thing. If you, in terms of a pet, so someone's cat, they don't always have collars, do they? Or, they are supposed to, but if they don't have collars, cats get caught up on things, don't they? And it pulls the collars off and things like that. You don't always know whether they've got an owner. But they normally have a chip that's inserted, and you take them to a vet and they can scan them. And this is something that you need to make sure happens. Even if you're doing any feral catching and you're really certain, like, no, I know they're feral cats, you still need that confirmation that it's not someone's pet, because you could be in breach of the Criminal Damage Act, because that animal is the ownership of us. The dogs that I have are my property, and the people that own domestic cats, it's their property. So if you were to inflict anything really on someone else's property, of course it would be under the Criminal Damage Act. Again, every effort should be made to determine if the cat is a pet, and that's usually left for a vet to check for microchips. I think you can actually just buy a microchip sensor. I say that. Can you buy them? I'm not sure. Let me know, you guys out there. Let us know if any of you have got any microchip readers, but I would imagine it's not a piece of kit that anyone's too particularly interested in purchasing. I don't think they'll be that cheap, but also how often will we be doing feral cats? Some of you may be doing it often. If you have any concerns about feral cats, just consider another method of control, or no control. Is it really necessary? Sometimes a nice feral cat population around a farmyard can be quite preferable for some farm owners. They quite like it. It keeps rat populations down, maybe even field mice, things like that. So just to consider, there's some extra sensitivities there. You can use, just as a side note, non-poisonous baits can be used to attract pest species into a cage. That's not an issue. But you do need to take care, and care should be taken to avoid attracting like domestic animals, like I said, with pets, because so you need to have that due diligence to ensure you're doing those checks. Okay. Blimey, time flies, isn't it, when you're having fun? So just a bit of a summary then. So be competent, be discreet, know your species and your trap, know the animal you're targeting, know possible other environmental issues, what other animals might be in the area, know the trap you're using, be familiar with it, be confident with it, know that it's not going to cause any harm or suffering, it's not going to catch its tail in the door as it closes down, because if that's a risk. Of course you're using the wrong size trap. Like this one here, it looks quite like a smallish one. You think of a squirrel going in there, probably a good chance that the door might go down before the squirrel's whole body is all the way through there. So trap door will come down onto its tail and of course cause suffering there. So important things to consider. Obviously follow the codes, they're there to help you, and keep records, right? Keep them for 2 years. We usually say keep your records for 2 years, treatment reports. That's a good guide to all measure ourselves by. And that's it. So I think, like I said, I say speed through. Blimey, I can't believe I've been talking for 50 minutes. Some of my colleagues be saying a week out, Natalie, you're talking and babbling all the time. But hey, that's my prerogative, isn't it? Okay, we have 11 questions in here. That's good. There's quite a lot of chat going on. Hopefully it's not because there's any technical issues. I don't think there were. Good, let's go. We've got 11 questions. Let's do it. Peter said he's getting an echo with my audio, but hopefully that sorted itself out. Okay, Martin Rogers. So interesting regarding using live catch traps for sites with protected species. This things like protected dormice, include protection from disturbance. Having spoken to Natural England, any protected dormice caught and released unharmed would amount to an offence, and you could end up in court anyway. Worth keeping in mind when using live capture traps such sites. Absolutely. And it's with the dormice, or edible dormice, should we say, because there are a couple of species, glis to be more specific. You do need to apply for a class licence. It lasts for the year. And then you have to report how many glis you've caught and dispatched and so on and so forth. The license is very descriptive. It tells you everything you need to do. Only a few of you have probably had to use it. As I said, it's quite specific, isn't it, to a certain area of the country. And I think now, in the next month or two, they might be off to sleep soon, the glis, because they'll hibernate through the winter. But I never had the pleasure of dealing with them myself. I always covered sort of southeast of London and the southeast sort of coast and Kent and places like that, which back in the day, but they weren't really around there. Never had the pleasure. Okay, done. Okay, that was a question. I'll leave that on there. So, Leonie, I know you've got something about your prompt number. I'll try and I'll send that on to our TPD team and they'll try and get it registered for you. So are foxes allowed to be reintroduced after capture? That was from Davina. So yeah, I did mention this. You might have put the question in before I went into the foxes side of things, but just to reiterate really briefly, there isn't the Wildlife and Countryside Act, it specifies certain species that you can't re-release into the UK, like grey squirrels and Canada geese, things like that. Foxes are not mentioned there. So people would say technically you can re-release, but our issue is that the abandonment of animals. Now, there was an act in 1960 that specifically addressed that abandonment issue and that it can cause physical and psychological suffering for the animal. But that was repealed, but it's still there, still exists. It's just within the Animal Welfare Act 2006. So imagine, taking that fox, who are very territorial, aren't they? They create, miles of territory and dominance in certain areas. And if you were to suddenly whip that dog fox or even vixen away from the area where their territory is into a territory, God knows where, that, other foxes, urban foxes, rural foxes, similar things, but, their territories can be larger, smaller, more dense, less dense. You just don't know where you're dropping that fox, do you? And what the situation is, and the food source that's going to be available to them is now going to be unknown. Won't know what to do with themselves. So it could be considered inhumane to re-release a captured fox in an area that's not their territory. Something to think about. Okay. Thanks for the question, Davina. Right. We've got Andrew Alford. So could releasing a mouse by a customer away from their kitchen be seen as illegal? An interesting one. So first thing, if you're house mouse, field mouse, generally any mouse, if it's in a property, certainly house mouse, and you release it away from where the building is, they're probably going to come back, aren't they? You'd have to take it some way away. And also you have got this abandonment issue as well. Why would we see taking an animal out of its environment and dumping it somewhere they have no clue where they are? Why would that be more humane? And I know, it's a tricky social question, isn't it? And moral question. And it's not something we, in terms of live capturing mice and rats, of course it can be done. They're out there. It's no problem. It's no issue. But what are you doing with them afterwards? Mice are pretty small and pretty tricky to dispatch as well. So, if you do catch a few of them in a trap, or one of them in a trap alive, what are you doing with it? How are you dispatching it? How are you doing it humanely and quickly and with little suffering? And in terms of releasing it, it's just not something that I think is actually in the best interest of the animal anyway. But in terms of what domestic homeowners do themselves, residential areas, amateur users, they can buy these traps, I know. But in terms of professionals, certainly releasing it just a few blocks down, or outside in the field over the road, it's not always going to prevent it from coming back into the property. But yeah, it can relate to what species you've got as well. Someone just missed that about captured fox release. Okay, I think I just answered the one about the captured foxes. So Stephen Parker, does it have to be the person who set the trap that checks the trap? Or can they be checked by another person? Amazing question, Stephen. Yes, good. Fab question, really important question. So if I'm setting a trap and I'm in this house and I'm like, right, I'm setting my squirrel trap, just using the squirrel trap as an example, it's just an easy one for me. In an attic, great, doors open, fab. Right, your responsibility now is to check on that trap every 12, 24 hours. If you delegate that task to, say, the customer in the house, if I say to the customer, can you check that trap in 12, 24 hours, please? And they say, yeah, no worries, Natalie. And then I go off and just rely on that they're going to ring me to tell me, oh, Natalie, I've got a squirrel. I've checked it, I promise. How can you be sure they are going to check it every 12 to 24 hours? Because if they don't, and suffering occurs and it ends up in the wrong place, the information, and you end up in a court of law, you will be the responsible one. It doesn't matter, even if you've written in the treatment report, customer says that they're going to check them. I'm not confident that you would still be free from responsibility in a court of law. Because at the end of the day, these are things that are important. Okay, what would happen if you got in front of a judge? And I'm not sure they would say, yeah, don't worry, your responsibility was taken away then because you said in your report somebody else is going to check them for me. Now, different circumstance. This is probably, glue boards, subject at the minute. We're not talking about glue boards, but it's kind of a live capture, isn't it, in a more distressing way, but live capture. And also with the live capture traps we're talking here, you could, which some have done in the past, provide some official training. So if, say, you've got a commercial customer and you've got some traps, you want them checking, if you could possibly provide some, recorded and official training on the importance of live capture traps and why they need to check them, and humane and so on and so forth, and you can do that, then possibly it might be a good idea, but you will still be responsible. That trap is still yours. You're the one who's purchased it. You're the one that owns that trap. You're the one that's put it down. You're the one that's carrying out the work. So in short, Stephen, my advice is no, it can't but be checked by another person, because live capture traps are a lot more sensitive than maybe necessarily spring traps, which are designed to kill. And if they're positioned properly, it's going to kill that pest straight away. But live capture traps, it's just holding it there. And it's so important they're checked regularly. And it's just, can you rely on that person to do it? And, because you will be the one in front of the judge if something went wrong. Okay, I hope that sort of answer. I can't say yes, no, but I can say I'm pretty certain, I'm pretty confident and advising you to no, don't put it in the responsibility of somebody else just because they want the job a bit cheaper. Maybe, you might think, well, I can offer it to them for a cheaper cost if I don't have to come back as regularly. Again, a court of law won't be too bothered about that.
And Nat, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right.
Can I just ask you are you on your webcam?
Yeah.
Can I just ask you to switch to your laptop camera while you're doing the questions? Because it's still flicking in and out quite a lot.
Yeah, you're probably getting me paused in weird positions as well.
Yeah, we are.
That's never pleasant for anybody. Right, let me do it now. There you go.
Let's see if that works better.
Okay. I thought there was an issue. Technology, blimey. Okay. Yeah, let me know. Pop on, Kat, if it's not any better, but I have flipped cameras now. Okay, so I knew I'd have a question about Canada geese. Assad, so how do we dispatch Canada geese if captured? Air pistol, is it permitted? I don't know, Assad. I'm going to leave that question in there, and I'm going to find out, pop it out on an email afterwards. Canada geese is very specialized area. It's not one, I say a jack of all trades. For me, that's a compliment. I like it when people say, jack of all trade. I consider everybody here jack of all trades because, we know a lot about a lot. Some things, though, are very specific and very niche. And Canada geese, for me, is one of those. And you need a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of patience, a lot of investment in time to deal with Canada geese. So, of course, it has to be humane, it has to be quick, and you have to make your own assumption on that. There is no legislation anywhere that says if you've got a Canada geese, this is how you dispatch it. It doesn't exist. So whatever you feel is the quickest and most humane way to do it, that's not one of the ways that are mentioned in the Wild Mammals Act. Okay, stabbing, impaling, burning, things like that. Okay, so I hope that might have answered it for you, but I'll maybe get a more specific answer on that for you. Okay, Andrew. So Andrew Lashan, so with regards to animal welfare and humaneness, and as not to cause unnecessary stress and suffering, RE the Animal Welfare Act, trapped pest species should not be removed from site, but dispatched humanely on site in a discrete location. Yeah, absolutely. So good point. It's tricky, so it depends on the site. I know certainly with fox control, some people who carry it out, some members that carry it out, live capture trapping, sometimes they are transported away from site and dispatched humanely because the size of them, the emotiveness of them, maybe the area that they're in isn't covered enough, or maybe even the method of dispatch is going to be too loud to do it in maybe a built-up area. Certainly, we get them in London a lot, don't we? So sometimes they are transported, and in a way that you usually cover the cage with a blanket so that they're not stressing out too much. Or maybe give them some food or water, and try and create as much of a relaxed environment as you can during transportation. But yeah, if you can do it on site, certainly. I used to do some feral pigeon myself. Again, usually they're on top of roofs or out the way, and you certainly wouldn't be taking them away from site and dispatching them. You will do it as quickly and, as I said before, and effectively and as humane as possible. So quickly is right there and then if you can. Okay, and quickly as in woof, swift hit. Most things are, a swift hit to the back of the head if it's a size appropriate animal. Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew. Really good to elaborate on that. Great. Microchip readers apparently are 40 quid from Amazon. Other suppliers available. I wish I read Amazon, but yeah, other suppliers available. Lots of amazing other suppliers out there. So yeah, Andrew, again, another comment. So you should never consider live capture trapping unless you have the legal and adequate means to dispatch the target species. Yep. Again, good elaboration on having that, and that's the whole thing about being prepared. And if you're saying, right, I'm gonna do some live capture trapping now, have you got the right information? Have you got the right competency? Are you sure it's legal to do the thing you're doing? If you got the right measures to be able to dispatch that animal humanely? Have you got the right tools? Have you got the right, sense to better do that quickly and effectively? Got to consider that. So yeah, good additive to that, Andrew. Thank you. Charlie Jones, a lot of customers ask me to release the squirrels caught on their property, which of course is not legal for me to do. As squirrels have been around for over 100 years, their numbers are not likely to increase through release, and the general consensus of the public appears to be pro-release. Is there a case for a change in the law? No, I mean, as you said, I think they've been around for hundreds of years. I can't see any changes in it. I can't see any reason for there to be a change. There's been no talk that I've heard of whether there's going to be a change and whether they can be re-released. But see, the problem with grey squirrels is that, again, I'm not going to go into it too much detail because I'm already 2 minutes over, but they cause a lot of damage, a lot of significant damage. There's a lot of forestry commissions in the UK that are, working seriously. I mean, there's the European Grey Squirrel Initiative, I think it's called. They're so concerned about the damage that grey squirrels do to woodlands in the UK that they're trying to get together a comprehensive approach to deal with the vast numbers of grey squirrels. I mean, just a small area of debarking a massive 200-year-old oak tree can kill it. I don't know about all the forestry issues that go on, but they do a lot of bark stripping and a lot of damage that occurs to the forest. But also, of course, the red squirrels, our native red squirrels, they outcompete them. They carry diseases that the red squirrels can't pass through, that red squirrels succumb to the diseases that some of the grey squirrels, not some of them, all of them, they carry, but they're not affected by it, whereas red squirrels are. So there's lots of issues with having grey squirrels, and because of that, I can't see that the law is going to be changed. Okay, I've still got 11 questions. I'm 3 minutes over. I think I'll allow myself to go 10 minutes over. So let's have another 7 minutes of questions. I appreciate everyone sticking with us. There's 175 of you. So hopefully you'll just give me another 7 minutes and I'll get through as many of these questions as I can. So is it right to use a webcam instead of checking cages once a day? So really good question as well, because there are devices, and in our code of practice, I haven't listed everything that's in our code of practice, but we do touch on electronic devices to monitor cage traps. And basically we say, if it's reliable, if you're happy that electronic device is giving you real reliable hourly information on the cage's status or what's in that cage or whether it's been set off or not, then yeah, absolutely. if it's reliable, that's your duty of care. But how do you maintain that reliability? How do you know that it's reliable? Is there an error report that might come through if it's stopped working? And of course, webcam, I suppose you'll know if it's gone off or not. So interesting idea how you'd set it up. I'm not sure, but if it works, it works. So yeah, you don't necessarily have to be physically there, but you need to be the one taking responsibility for it. So Valentina, how can you make sure that an area is suitable for the dispatch? Have a look around, see who's around, see what's around. You've got to try and make the animal as comfortable as possible and relaxed as possible before said dispatch occurs. But of course, we all know squirrels, for example, they're pretty excitable. So, you can do what you can do. But the suitable area for dispatch, it's what's around your environment. Depends what animal you're dispatching, but mainly humans. Least amount of humans possible is the best case scenario. Okay. Okay, another camera question. So that's good. We've just dealt with that. So Stuart, how have you dealt with customers in the past with live trapping when it came to explaining about having a legal obligation to humanely dispatch them? Yeah, it's a really emotive subject, isn't it? And sometimes, regardless of how pleasantly you put it or how well you word the fact that this is a legal obligation, some people are always still going to have a problem with it. It's the industry we're in, and just explaining that you can't re-release these things because it's an abandonment, and actually more explaining to them that by releasing them somewhere else is going to cause them possibly significantly more harm than if you dispatch them quickly and humanely. The psychological issue of being abandoned, but also possibly the physical, the fighting with other established territorial animals that might be in the area, can cause some, significant suffering physically. But, if they get in a fight, but there's not a quick kill there, and then they're left to, die in the bush somewhere, it could take hours and hours and hours. Now, the amount of detail you want to go into is each person's individual judgment, depending on the customer you've got. But it's got to be explained. It's a legal requirement. It is tricky, but it's part of the industry. Okay, so honestly, not a question, but we trap gliss on a large scale. Great, Rachel. You're in Hertfordshire. That was it, Hertfordshire. I was trying to remember the county they were in, Hertfordshire. So impracticable for the officers to check all their live traps daily due to the quantity. We make the customers sign a disclaimer explaining their duty to check and contact us. So, like I said before, if that's something you're comfortable with and you're certain it's reliable, just remember you're still always going to be responsible for it. If, it hasn't happened yet, hopefully it won't, but I'm pretty sure even with that disclaimer or even with that, we'll check it for you. If you ended up in a court of law, it depends on the solicitors, doesn't it, on the prosecution and so on and so forth and what powers they have. But, if you can avoid it, great. If you can't, things like that may work. Maybe even looking into some electronic devices that can, save you that time and those visits as well. Something to consider. Great. I've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to do one more. Let me try and pick one that's not. No half copies, just equipments. No, I've been able. No. Canada geese. Yeah, we've had a look at that one, didn't we? Oh, okay. So actually, I think we might be done. So all the other questions are about CPD and. So, actually, Andrew Lasham here has said about Canada geese neck dislocation is something they do, or knows that is an appropriate way. So, yeah, quick and humane. As long as you know where that point is that you need to do it, that's important. Maybe some training. Okay, I think that's it. I've got a question about a comment about microchip scanner. So there was cheap, getting respective companies that hold the customer's data. So that's the key, isn't it? The microchip scanners, is it GDPR? I'm not sure. Probably a bit more to that question as well, isn't there? So I'll have a little look into that, actually. Maybe pop it out in an email and let you all know a bit more about that whole GDPR. And if you're scanning microchips and it gives you the data of who owns it, it's probably going to actually be more appropriate in the hands of a vet. So Okay, good. 10 minutes over, blimey. I always do that, don't I? But hey, you guys have been asking some great questions. Really appreciate it. Hopefully today's been really helpful. If it hasn't, as always, tell me what would be helpful. Say, Natalie, could have been better. I like constructive criticism. I want to know what you like these webinars to cover so I can make sure it's covered and you get some value out of it, value out of it, because your time is valuable and I want to make sure it's utilized. Okay, well, I'm going to go and sort my webcam out, throw it in the bin, maybe. Doesn't work. And again, really appreciate you guys being here. Keep in touch. Give me a call, give me an email, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Okay, see you guys. Bye.